I'm a student at McGill University, and I mean the big defining event on our campus this summer has been the brutal crackdown on the encampment. Our university administration, hired a private security firm, hired goons to come in and smash up this encampment, crushed everyone's belongings, cleared out the camp, and the campus has actually been on lockdown ever since. It's been wild to witness.
It's been very radical. You basically call a protest and people will be there. They immediately take to the streets. They immediately take to the quads, right? They're protesting. But for the last couple of months, I think the energy's been kind of unsure as to where it needs to go, what needs to happen next. The energy, especially on the campuses, is really, really good. Right now, it's just a little dizzy. It doesn't know exactly where to go.
This fall, not only are people coming back, but also there's a whole new layer of students coming onto the campus, right? Who also have witnessed, almost a year of a genocide now. So we have a whole generation as well that has been politicized by this already, and who are now asking, well, what's next?
It's been almost a year since the genocide in Gaza first started. Every day we're inundated with videos and pictures of men, women, and children in body bags or mourning their loved ones. Here in Canada, we've seen protests of thousands, tens of thousands spread across the country, and a monumental shift in support for the struggle of the Palestinians. But these protests, calling on the government to do something, were ignored and slandered by the media. Over the course of months, they slowly dwindled down in size, as people began to realize you can't simply ask the imperialists to see the light and change their ways. And what this led to, all over the world, was this spark of the encampment movements, where students in the United States, in Canada, in Britain, Germany, France, even as far as Australia, set up tents and demanded that their universities disclose their investments and divest from the Israeli war machine. But across the board, these encampments failed to grow into movements larger than these isolated groups of activists and protesters. So that today, all of the encampments have been crushed or intimidated or suppressed in any number of ways. We need to draw the necessary lessons from this experience to learn in the process of the struggle to free Palestine how we can fight and win. And we have to understand that the anger that led to these movements has not disappeared. This anger that people still feel is looking for a point of expression. And that's why this September the RCP is mobilizing for a student strike on every Canadian campus to build a movement that cannot be ignored and that cannot be suppressed. And to do this, we're calling on every organization that stands with the Palestinians, that stands for ending the genocide, along with every student, teacher, university employee, and everyone who supports this movement to organize behind making this student strike an inescapable reality. So this week in the Revolutionary Communist podcast, we're joined by students spread out across the country who are preparing to hit the ground on their campuses this fall and to bring the movement for a student strike for Palestine to life. Thanks for joining us, comrades. This week, we are talking about a student strike to end the genocide in Gaza. So, right now, we're going to be joined by a number of different students spread out across the country. So, the first question that I wanted to ask, what's been the role of the Canadian state, Canadian businesses, and also the Canadian universities in making this genocide possible?
I think one of the really tricky things about, imperialism in our day and age is how opaque a lot of it is, right? Imperialism is not always as clear-cut as, boots on the ground, direct, invasion or military control or anything like this. Most of the time the strings are very much invisible, right? It's the connections of capital, of diplomatic relations that protect interests. And so when it comes to, Canadian corporations, the Canadian state, right? For generally speaking, the role that Canada has played in the world is usually that of the, U.S.'s little brother, right? Following U.S. imperialism's policy. And so when it comes to, of course, Israel and I mean their genocidal campaign in Gaza and also their attempts to incite a much broader regional war in the Middle East, Canada's role, that again of the state and of Canadian corporations, has been one of tacit support of Israel, because it really is one of the last remaining stable allies for Western imperialism in the region.
The main demand was divestment, of course. The University of Toronto has its own investment management company that has ties to companies that are very much profiting off of the war in Gaza. That was the main demand, as well as cutting ties with Israeli universities. The University of Toronto has academic partnerships with them. So that was one of the demands as well.
Really thinking about what the UBC administration has done itself is its investments, right? One of the things that I find so interesting that's happened over the past couple of months is that students have been demanding disclosure. But by and large, the students have kind of realized they've just had to do it themselves in terms of disclosure. They've just had to pour through the investments that the universities have made. They've had to pour through who these board of governors are, what have they said, what have they done. At UBC, some of the students have found, they basically put together this huge document detailing what's going on, what the actual number looks like. Between 2022 and 2023, UBC's investments into arms and surveillance contractors, for the IDF specifically, increased by 400%. Investment into military contractors alone amounts to about $16 million. This number, I think it's something in the $200 million is the number that this report has come to. Right, the university administration is saying things like, well, that's out of a almost $3 billion endowment, so that's actually only 1% of 1%. Right? They have no concept of how messed up this is. They have no concept of how fucked up what they're doing actually is.
Essentially, there is no red line. There is nothing that is too horrible for, U.S. imperialism, for Canadian imperialism to support. And so I think for the movement back here, the question has become, well, where do we have points of leverage, right? Where can we tell our ruling class that they have to listen to us? Because so far they have been very, very happy to ignore, the population at home, who overwhelmingly stands with the Palestinians, who overwhelmingly, condemns the actions of Israel. And so, again, the focal point, right, has been the universities, who, again, the sort of in this sick logic of how capitalism works, are heavily invested in all of this stuff, right? I mean, McGill University, heavily invested in Raytheon, in Airbus, in all manner of these weapons companies that are seeing their profits double and triple and continue to go up and up and up, for every friggin' bomb that is dropped on the head of a child in Gaza.
And so at UBC, these protests have been going on forever. They've even intertwined with things like tuition increases have happened, and we agitated against that. There's an understanding that these things are coming from the same source. But yeah, UBC's raised rent. They've raised tuition. They used to have a tuition survey, their pseudo-democracy, where they kind of go, hey, student body, we want to hear from you. The last one that they ever did last year showed that students were it was 97% in favor of rejection. They did not want their tuition raised. 97% of the student body didn't want their tuition raised. So what did the administration do? They got rid of the survey. I think that's emblematic of their approach to protests and the encampment. They pretend like they don't exist. They lie. They try to cover them up. They go no acknowledgement, no discussion. So I think the students are fed up with that. I think they're really fed up with that. And I think that line between the students, the professors, and the staff of the university, that line between them and the university administration is becoming very, very clear. If you ever want to know where this line is on your campus, who is the administration is a question you need to be asking. Who is your administration? Almost every campus in Canada is run by a board of governors or a board of directors or a board of something. And I can promise you that if you look into yours, almost half or just a simple majority of them will be appointed by the lieutenant governor of your province. So entirely undemocratic. These people are exactly who you would expect. At UBC, our president, the president of UBC met with, I don't know if people remember this, the education minister at the time, Selena Robinson. She called Gaza a crappy piece of land with nothing on it. And he went in front of Parliament to argue against divestment. So if you want to know who you're up against, really just look into your Board of Governors, look into who these people are, because I think the class line will start to become very, very clear that their interests will never align with the student body. The university administration at UBC is not going to do what we need it to unless we force it to. We need to make sure that they can't ignore our next actions. And I think that's actually what makes a student strike so necessary, is it's something they functionally can't ignore. A student strike campaign is it's entirely necessary at UBC, because for months the student body has understood the administration is going to be ignoring them, but I don't know if all of the organizers have understood this and haven't really tailored their actions accordingly. After the encampment, that's been cut through. I think people completely understand what needs to be done now.
But I guess the question has to be asked, because the movement isn't just beginning. This has been going on for months. There have been demos of tens of thousands of people in cities across Canada. There have been encampments on every major campus, at least to my knowledge, some of which lasted actually for months. Why haven't any of these steps, any of these, strategies worked so far in ending the genocide or ending the complicity of the Canadian state, the Canadian universities, the businesses? And what would it take for us to succeed? What will it take for us to win, for the genocide to end, and ultimately for the Palestinian people to be able to live, a decent life?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that really allows you to make sense of all of this, allows you to make sense of how sort of unsensitive to the democratic will of people, our institutions are, is to understand that they are not neutral institutions, right? Like, that's kind of the ideology of capitalism, of the state, essentially requires people to, essentially think of these institutions as neutral institutions. But what allows you to understand how things have actually played out with the Palestine movement, and generally speaking, the nature of the state, is to understand that it's not neutral at all, right? It is a state that is, owned and controlled by a certain class, of the ruling class, right? And it is them and their interests in the Middle East, in Israeli imperialism, that essentially make it impossible for them to accede the demands of the masses, right? Now, that reality, I think, came into full contradiction with a lot of the leadership of this movement at the beginning, who, I think we have to say, has done an incredible job in, mobilizing people, getting people out there, and spreading awareness about this issue. But a lot of the times the solutions that were being presented were essentially liberal solutions.
Trudeau pick a side was a big slogan that I kept hearing.
Well, I think Trudeau has picked a side. He made his decision from day one, right? And again, any attempt to persuade him otherwise was essentially a futile exercise. And that is why at a certain point the movement did qualitatively take a step forward to essentially say, we are done asking nicely. We are now demanding this. We are, using whatever power we have to try to put, to really force our ruling class to listen to us. And of course, that was a very positive step. But, for the most part, it was restrained to smaller groups of activists on campuses who, again, took very courageous steps forward. But I think also there was an issue of timing a little bit. It was towards the end of the semester. And it generally failed to become the sort of mass action that would have actually scared our ruling class to the point where they might have done something, right?
At a certain point, the encampment stopped growing and it didn't spread. I think we were the only ones who were calling for, the workers on campus to come in. The TA union was sympathetic. They eventually did put out a statement, in support of the encampment, but that didn't really go anywhere either. yeah, I think that was like the main reason that, you know, a small group of people can only be out on a field for so long before getting tired or needing to go back to work or needing to go take care of their families or needing to go back home. Yeah, I think it absolutely needs to spread to a wider layer of the student body. In September, all of the students at U of T are going to come back to campus. There's going to be thousands of new frosh that are going to be on campus every day and are going to be talking to each other about what's going on and are going to be very, very angry and are going to want to do something. So I think in order to actually win divestment from U of T, to contribute something to ending the genocide, many, many more people need to get involved than what is possible through an encampment. And I think a student strike is the perfect way to do that.
I think if you want to, I guess, get a positive example of what is possible, once a movement builds up to a scale where the ruling class really is scared, we just have to look at some of the events that are occurring in Bangladesh right now. Yeah, I mean, they're these very courageous students. They started this protest movement against a seemingly very narrow demand, basically just the opening up of a bunch of government positions and so on to the general population rather than being reserved for cronies of the regime. But this movement, which started on university campuses, it quickly became about much, much more than that, because these students managed to build up these committees of struggle that really spread the movement to all of the students on the campuses. And from that, the movement spread into the streets, and it became a movement of tens of thousands, and then hundreds of thousands, and then millions. It shows you how quickly, these mass movements can reach these revolutionary dimensions because of all the anger that is already built up in the foundations of society, right? It's just looking for an expression. And that is where I think the student movement does have this incredible potential, is that it can serve as this spark that ignites this broader anger.
Think about, like, what skills do you have? What things can you do? What are you good at? Are you good at writing? Are you good at drawing? Are you good at, like, graphic design? Do you just have, like, a bunch of really good agitational slogans just floating around in your head? Awesome. Bring them out into the movement, right? Yeah, I think, like, the biggest impact that we can have, especially if, like, even if you're, like, alone on a campus, right? You might think that you're alone. You might think that you're the only one there who wants a student strike, but I guarantee that that's not the case. I guarantee that there are other people. Just start talking to your colleagues. Start talking to coworkers. Start talking to your professors. Start talking to your TAs. Most people understand that something is wrong. I think at this point, over 300 days in, people are angry and they want to do something. They don't know exactly what they need to do. And so getting involved in something like a student strike campaign requires as many people as possible. And the only way that you can get those people is by talking to them, is by letting people know that you want to stand for something too. And I think that'll kind of be like a beacon for your friends or for other students in your classes to realize, like, okay, this is something we can actually do. This is something people are calling for.
Well, yeah, I mean, here I think we actually see a fantastic depiction, essentially, of the role of the type of organization that we're trying to build, right? The role of a revolutionary party. It's that in these earlier phases of the movement, the movement went through these big, powerful upsurges and so on, but every phase of the movement can only go so long. And what the RCP, I think, has done very well is that at each stage we have kind of tried to say, okay, well, what is the next step? And tried to connect with a layer of people who are coming to those same conclusions, which has left us in a position now where, in Montreal, for example, we have an organized presence on a number of cégeps, on all of the major universities and so on, right? And it has put our organization in this position where we can put this step forward, right? And I think it's like, the issue is not that people are demoralized, that they don't care. The anger is still there. I mean, I hear it when I talk to people, when we go out in the street and we sell the paper and all these sorts of things. The issue is that as individuals, you can feel incredibly disempowered, right? What are you going to do, right? And this is where the role of an organization, this is where the role of a leadership is so important, that we can say, well, this is what we think is the next step forward. And we can essentially become like a seed crystal out of which something much larger can grow. And again, that's what we're trying to do now in the fall. At all of these cégeps and universities, our comrades are going to be out there talking to people about this campaign for a student strike, trying to win people over to this perspective and showing them that there is something that they can do, right? That anybody who agrees with us on this can immediately get involved. That there's a tangible thing that they can, do for Palestine right now. And I think this is exactly how you break through this period of ebb, in a sense, right? Again, having an understanding and a perspective.
Yeah, I think the point that you made about leadership is very important for us to understand that, as individuals, we are isolated. There's very little that we can do. But with an organized presence, if we're discussing what are the next steps of the movement, suddenly, actually, as activists and students, as workers on these campuses and beyond these campuses, we're much stronger than just the sum of all of the individuals. We can become a real force. And I think, another point that we should make is in our last issue of the paper, we published, an open call towards a student strike for Palestine. Basically with the goal, strike on the campuses, bring in all of the students in Canada that we can behind this movement to force the government to stop its support of Israel, to force Canadian businesses to stop their support of Israel. But in order to accomplish this, it cannot just be, one organization. It can't just be the communists fighting on the front lines. We have to be able to bring in every single organization that's in support of Palestine, every Palestine group in every city across the country. And on top of that, all of the student unions, which many of whom have passed declarations, have passed resolutions in support of the Palestinians, in opposition to what's going on. What we need to do is take every single layer of society that's willing to fight, that supports the Palestinian people, and to unite them. There are many different opinions on where this is going, on what the demands should be, on the next steps for the movement. That is totally fine. We can debate, we can discuss, we can come to a conclusion on what needs to be done in a comradely discussion in the movement itself. But I think the first step of what needs to happen is that every organization has to come together behind the demand for a strike. Because, like you were saying, you gave us a very good history of where has the movement been, what have we seen already. I think the very next logical step has to be a strike of the whole student population. And then from there, maybe even, like you were saying with events going on in Bangladesh, a fantastic example, this can become a mass movement that forces the hand of our own ruling class and that raises the question of who should really decide how society is run.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at McGill, that's the task we are taking up in the next weeks ahead. There are dozens of student organizations on the campus that stand in solidarity with Palestine. Our student union, right, so far has been very, very passive, but I think there is real potential, right, to get these organizations on board. And so this is the task that our comrades are, launching into in the coming weeks, is to try to convince every single one of these organizations to take up this campaign for a student strike with us. And through that, to convince the majority of the student body. Like you said, because actually, Montreal in particular, has an incredible history with the student movement, right? Very famously, the 2012 student strike, I think the largest student movement in the history of North America. But I think what people don't know is that, like, the lead up to 2012, it didn't happen overnight, right? It was a process of months. It took the better part of a year of patiently explaining and winning over layer after layer of the student body to the idea of a strike that made the movement as powerful as it was once the strike was finally called. And with this student strike for Palestine, we're not trying to have a strike for the sake of having a strike. We're having a strike because we want to win, right? And so that means that this is going to be a campaign, potentially a prolonged campaign to win over the majority of the student body, right? To the point where we have the numbers to make a student strike truly successful, to make it reach the proportions where we can also draw in wider layers of society, right? That's the point where we want to get to. And so, when we say a campaign for a student strike, again, this is not, 2nd of September, we're striking. No, we are going to be out there patiently, day to day, flyering, postering, talking to people, generally, popularizing this idea, explaining to people why it is the next step forward. I think, again, this is, in a sense, this is what the role of leadership means, right? It means to play that active role in trying to win a broader layer of, whether it be the working class or the student body, over to these ideas. And again, we really, really hope that as many students and as many organizations as possible take up this call, because the more do, the louder our voice, the more impact and the more momentum this campaign is going to get.
Thank you again for listening, comrades. If you agreed with what you heard, if you're looking for a way to join and to participate in the student strike for Palestine, but don't know where to begin, or if you're on your own, I'd encourage you to reach out to us and we can help you to get started. I'll link a few articles in the show notes below, published on the RCP's website, calling for the student strike campaign. And as always, if you want to fight against capitalism, then I'd encourage you to join the RCP and to help us build the Revolutionary Party. That's all for this week, comrades. I'll see you again next time, and I'll see you on the front lines of the student strike for Palestine.